Hi everyone, welcome back to Biblical Hebrew, our first quiz of the quarter. So beginning on page 85, Seau has a whole list of verbs that we're going to study for a quiz for next week. And I wanted to say a couple of things about this. These are things that I'll reiterate in class or that you've already heard if you're watching this video later. But the forms of the verbs that Seau gives you on 85 and 86 are actually the third masculine singular perfect forms of the verb. So perfect meaning a type of verb, usually translated as past tense. So the part that I have kind of a quibble with is, for example, in the first verb, ahav, he says is to love. And I suppose as you're learning verbs, this is probably helpful, but technically this is not how you present what is called the infinitive, the to do something form in a language. That's a completely different form. So that's a little misleading, and sometimes students study it this way, and then later they find it's something completely different, and they find that upsetting. So what we're going to do here is give you the roots and I'll give you the verbal sense of the root, and that is how we're going to learn to study for this particular quiz. Now, a complicating matter is when we talk about roots, so that we don't always have to name letters, like our first root is olive, hay, bet. That's kind of a mouthful. So usually when people talk about biblical Hebrew roots, they just tack on an ah vowel, like you see in the list here from Seau on page 85. So that's what I'm going to do too. Just understand that all I'm really testing you on is the root itself, but to speak, I guess, more fluently about the root, we're going to just tack on ah vowels, and I think you'll see what I mean. So our first root is ahav, which means the verbal action of loving. And you maybe recall this root from our quiz way back when. Va'ahavta et Adonai. So you will love the Lord. And it's the same root. So now you're learning it. Our next root is ahal, which means to eat, consume, or devour. So this is both people physically eating food, but other things can be consumed as well. So for example, a building or a field could be consumed by fire using this same root. Or for example, Moses goes out in the desert and he sees this bush that's burning, and the text says something along the lines of the bush burned, but it was not consumed. It was not consumed by the fire. So that's this root. Next root is amar, which has to do with speaking and saying. You maybe remember this from Vayomer from last quarter. It's this same root and very common root in biblical Hebrew. Our next root is bo. So this immediately, I guess, violates my rule of adding vowels when we're talking about roots. So when there's a middle root, vav, a middle letter in the root vav, then typically the o vowel gets tacked onto that to just kind of emphasize the fact that it is a middle vav root. And so this is the root bo, which means to come in or enter. And remember that middle vowels often drop out. So way back when we were studying the participles, you'll notice that the middle vav is completely gone in the participial form. So just something to be aware of. Our next root is bana, which means to build. And note this is the third hay root, so oftentimes third hay drops out, so it's just something to be aware of when you see this root. Our next root is gala, which means to uncover or go away or go into exile. So we also have to get used to the idea that some roots can have more than one general meaning. So perhaps there is some place back in the history of the language where uncovering and going to exile is related, but I don't think we know enough about that to know that. So it's just always good to keep in mind that a particular root can have more than one definition. Oftentimes the definitions are related, but not always. Next root is halach, which means to walk or to go. So as you might imagine, a very, very common root. For this particular root, one of the things that makes it problematic is the fact that the initial hey in this root can drop out in various forms. I think sometimes the most common words in any language, including Biblical Hebrew, are the ones that are the most irregular. So that's kind of an oddity with this particular verb, which is unfortunate because it comes up so often. So just something to be aware of there. Yada means to know, and on your quiz sheet that I posted on Canvas, I also added the definition to have sexual relations with. So the idea of knowing and having sex with has a relationship in Biblical Hebrew. It's the same root. And speaking of, we have yalad, which means to bear or to beget. So all of those begat passages in Genesis use this particular verb. Next root is yatsa, to go out or go forth. It can also mean to go out into battle, kind of to march out, often used that way. Yarad means to go down or descend. In the Hebrew Bible, for whatever reason, if you're in the land of Canaan, you yarad to go to Egypt. So you always go down to Egypt. You also maybe think of the word down the road, Yarden, which is the Jordan River, and if you've comes from the same root. And if you've ever been to Israel, Palestine, and you go to the Jordan, you'll notice that the Jordan is in a really deep valley. So that kind of all makes sense. Yashav, which means to sit or remain or stay or dwell. Probably most often to dwell. Katav, to write, record, or register. Matzah, to find. Nata, stretch out, extend, incline. Natan, give, deliver, set, permit. Avar means to cross over or pass over to a place. It also means to transgress in the sense of when a person transgresses the law. So in that sense, the way the Israelites thought about this is transgressing the law is sort of overstepping a boundary. And I think that's where the idea of crossing over and transgressing, i.e. breaking a law, kind of gets intermingled here, or where that idea comes from. So in this sense, the root can mean different things, but yet I think back in the history of the language, there is a clear connection between these two definitions, or the way that the Israelites think. So this one's slightly different than the example of Galah we talked about earlier, which are just, I think, completely different definitions. Amad is stand, remain, or persist. Kara means call. So I can call somebody to do a task, but I can also call somebody a name. And often if I'm calling somebody a name, then that'll be followed by the preposition la, just so you're aware of that. Ra'ah, very common root, which has to do with seeing. Here again, third hey root often drops out, so this is a little confusing for people, especially because it's so common. So just kind of be aware that third hey roots, um, you know what they do, right? Sha'al is ask or inquire. Shama, hear, listen, or obey. Oftentimes, hearing with the sense of kind of listen up, or I don't know, like when you're dealing with kids, when you want them to hear you, you really want them to hear and obey what it is that you're saying. So you maybe remember again from your oral exam, we began with the Shema, which is actually the command form telling people to hear, but the same root comes into play here. And our final root is Shamar, which means to keep, as in to keep a law or to observe something diligently. So Sayal also gives you observe, but it can also be watch in the sense of, we talk about maybe somebody being a keeper as sort of a guard or responsible for something. So it also has the sense to not only to keep, as in usually keeping the law, observing the law, but it also has this nuance of guarding too. So it's kind of being careful, being watchful, making sure that you're following the law as you should. Anyway, those are our roots for this coming week. So good luck studying for the quiz. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks. Bye.